Welcome back to the Deliberate Leaders podcast. Today, we're getting into one of the most significant shifts happening in professional services. It's the move from project-based consulting to AI-powered platforms that deliver insight on demand and at scale. McKinsey has Lilly, Gartner has Ask Gartner, and what we're seeing is early on is more engagement and better retention. This isn't just testing, it's working. It's a genuine rethink of how experts' knowledge gets created, packaged, and delivered. My guest today is building this from the inside. Amy Farner is the EVP and head of product at the Bersin Company, where she's helped launch Galileo, which is an AI research and advisory platform, putting on-demand insights directly into the hands of HR and business leaders. Amy, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Allie. It's a pleasure to be here.
My pleasure too. I'm excited for this conversation. I want to get this started kind of where the money is, because I think that's where the truth often is. So McKinsey has Gartner, the Josh Bersin Company has Galileo, Gartner has Ask Gartner. These firms have built empires on knowing things their clients don't. So why would they build tools that start closing that gap?
It's such a great question, and it really speaks to the power of AI to completely reshape this industry. If you think about the consulting industry, historically, it's been based on privileged access to information. That's a huge component of the value proposition. And it's also been based on taking the time to do really in-depth, thoughtful projects. We're going to take 6 weeks. We're going to build out the solution. We're going to hand you the deck, and the clouds will part, and you'll have this amazing answer. They've been wonderful models for us, but we now live in an age in which information is abundant, and it's the ability to apply that information, personalize that information, and use it to make faster, better decisions that differentiate successful organizations. And that's what consulting clients are looking for. So when you look across the scope of solutions like Lilly, like Ask Gartner, and like Galileo, our own tool that we have at the Josh Bersin organization, the way I see it is there's really kind of two value propositions here. The first is accelerating internal work for organizations, right? So in my previous life, I worked at Deloitte Consulting, and we had an army of folks who were out there building slides, doing the legwork, spending countless hours, billable hours, doing all the work that went into these projects. And that meant that the elapsed time took longer. Now, all of a sudden, we can accelerate the path to value for clients and bring questions to them more quickly. But beyond that, we're also seeing some of these tools like Ask Gartner, like Galileo, that are customer facing, because customers are saying, I don't want that information locked up behind a wall. I have access to information. If I ask ChatGPT a question, it answers every time. But I don't know if I can trust it. So what I'm really looking for is the immediacy that I'm seeing elsewhere in the market, but I want to blend that with the reliability and trustworthiness of information that I've gotten historically from a McKinsey, from a Gartner, from a Josh Bersin organization.
I appreciate that, because you're right. I mean, we do have other tools, but there's a trust factor to the information that's being provided. I'm also curious, is there a version of this where we're training? Are we looking to train them to not need us as much as the consultants?
I really don't think that's the case. I think that there is, it's scary, right? We are facing, as many industries are, kind of an existential crisis. How do we adapt to survive in a new environment? But I think there is still an absolutely critical role that consultants play. So if you think about it, there's always a need for consultants to bring that outside in perspective. So AI will give you an answer, Galileo will give you an answer, and Galileo will give you potentially multiple answers if you ask it to provide several options for you. But that ability to differentiate and strategically evaluate what is the right answer and the right path for your organization, that's an outside perspective that I think is still incredibly valuable from the consulting industry. So I think that piece is 100% there. The other thing is, we still, an inside business, once you take yourselves outside of the consultant role, we still often need to sell that right path and bringing in those experts who can say, I've seen this not just in the context of your business, but in 10 other businesses. And here's where I've seen these fail. And here's how I can kind of stand behind this approach. It gives you that one kind of authority that can stand behind it and sometimes be the fall person if it doesn't work. And I think businesses still do value having that as well.
I love the fact that we have access to you because you've been building the product for your company from the inside. And so I just want to kind of dive into that component. I've got an engineering architectural, like the building part that I want to understand. So everyone claims that their AI tool is working. But what are the genuine signals that show that it actually is working for you? And
Oh, go
yeah, let me
ahead.
just ask that one first because I have follow-up questions on that one.
Okay. Yeah. So that is a great question. As we built Galileo, our first iteration of it. So for those of you, if anyone listening is familiar with Josh Bersin, Josh has been around for 25 plus years, is a really respected voice in HR advisory, and insight building and thought leadership. And when AI hit the market, Josh said, "This is amazing. We have a gold mine of information. Let's plug it in." And so, we really started experimenting very, very early in the chat GPT phase by basically taking our content, plugging it in, and lo and behold, it gave an answer. And I think, Ali, your question really gets to the heart of this, which is that it's very, very easy in the age of AI to build a chat bot, to build an agent that will give answers. What's very, very hard is to build an agent that provides reliability and value in those answers. And so we are constantly tuning Galileo. We have a set of our golden prompts that we evaluate on a regular basis to say, is it not just providing an answer, but is it providing an answer that is the best possible answer? Is there stability in the way that it's responding to the prompts that we're providing to it? Is the information been chunked and coded in ways that make it as easy as possible for the LLM to consume and to navigate that information? All of that actually is really, really critical. And so looking at those signals for, are we seeing those reliable responses? And we really started very lo-fi. We would feed Galileo questions, and then we would say, well, I know all of our research. Is this what I would have said? And then over time, we've really evolved that to more automated testing to create more robust ingestion processes. And what we found is that each time we're getting better and better responses out of Galileo. And we do keep that human in the loop. So we're never just looking at the automated test of, is this the ideal answer? But are we still standing behind? If the answer varies, is it a better answer? Has the model evolved? Are we now using a different model that's going to give us a better answer? So continuing to keep pace with that change.
I can't, I almost as a layperson can't comprehend the magnitude of change that's happened. And I'm curious, is there any metric that you tracked early on that turned out to mean absolutely nothing?
Oh, that's a really good question. Um, huh. I don't know that there was a metric that has meant nothing because in the early days, there were so few metrics. But what we did find is that there were constant surprises in terms of the use cases and the ways that the content was being used. And so I might say that perhaps, we really initially thought that it was going to be about volume of short-term, really simple requests. Help me find this piece of information. Help me navigate to this report. So really kind of thinking of it like a super search. But instead, what we really found is that the use cases are often much more robust and valuable. So while I'd love for every HR professional to have Galileo sitting on their sidebar using it 100 times a day, often the most valuable things that I'm hearing are, I pulled this out for a really strategic, high impact project. And the effect that this had spanned over months. I was able to use Galileo as my thought partner to build a plan that I'm now, a month, 2 months into implementing, and it's going great. I didn't have to go back to Galileo to continue to tweak it, though maybe I did. But it's not about that volume of use so much as it is the value of the use that they're getting out of it. Though we are seeing the volume is going up so dramatically as well.
Yeah, that is fantastic. So seeing the volume and the renewal rates, like with the shift, bringing Galileo to your clients, what do you attribute that to? Is it just that people want AI itself, or is it that access to what used to be consultancy only gives them access right at their desktop without picking up the phone?
hmm So I think it's a couple of things. The first is, as a whole, we as a society, I believe, are on an AI adoption journey. And
Mhm.
so 2 years ago, when we first introduced Galileo, the number of our potential users who felt comfortable going out and using generative AI, or who worked at organizations that had the governance models in place that allowed them to use generative AI, that was a relatively small number. So we are kind of being carried along this wave of AI adoption, and it's becoming more and more ingrained in the way that people work. They just have these AI tools sitting next to them as their thought partners, helping them to do that work. So that's absolutely been a part of it. But the other thing that's really kind of evolved as well is the way that we're able to counsel and support our users. So we are really trying to build a model where, they are able to access that information in a really easy and user-friendly way. And the best way we can do that is to help them get over that blank box syndrome. So we have built out use cases, we've built out structured prompts, we have workflows that say, all right, what do you want to do today? We've built out an interactive workflow where you can partner with Galileo to achieve a specific goal. That's been incredibly valuable in promoting utilization and helping people to get more value out of the tool. Because left to their own devices, you're limited by human imagination. And by the way, most of these are things that Galileo could have done 2 years ago. We just didn't think to ask it. So we've got 2 years of experience now under our belts.
Okay, you're kind of leading into my next question. So, I think it's just fascinating that, you've helped turn basically a consulting practice into a product, right? So what were some of the assumptions that you made that were like wrong and it genuinely surprised you?
Yeah, so I think the first one is we assumed limits on the ability to use AI empowered tools that did not exist. We really went in and we said this is going to be a research summary tool, it's going to be a navigation tool, and it's going to take what we've built over 25 years and make it easy to access. But what we've actually found is that it is so much more than that. The way I think of Galileo is that it is the connective tissue between the strategy that we develop and the implementation, which needs to be hyper personalized to the organization and their situation, their industry, their specific variant of a challenge that they're facing. And so now there really is that ability to personalize the content and the research that we're putting out there and say, write me the emails that I need for the communications package. Build me an implementation plan with these limitations or these requirements. All of that is now possible. So that research is unlocked in a way that we had never assumed. So that's absolutely there. That was one of our core assumptions. And we very quickly realized that we were missing the majority of the value if we didn't really encourage folks to use it in that way.
Right. Yeah, that's brilliant. In thinking about like the business model, the economics of it, if consultancies start looking like software as a service where you're in subscriptions and platforms and recurring revenue, is this an actual better way of doing business, do you think?
So I do, obviously, or we wouldn't be doing what we're doing, right? But yeah, I mean, I 100% do. So number one, it's where the market is going to take them. This is what their customers are looking for and what they're expecting. If we as consulting organizations are not providing them access to this information and this level of personalized advice and support, someone else will move in and displace us. But number two, we talked a little earlier about the army of consultants. This is such an incredibly scalable way to provide advice and support to users. This is just, it means so much in terms of the ability to build more scalable businesses, businesses that are more less reliant on hiring trends, on expensive and specialized labor. And it really does free up that expensive and specialized labor to work at the top of their license and to really say, where are those tricky strategic issues that we as consultants need to be focusing on rather than really focusing on, well, I better get that PowerPoint deck looking absolutely perfect.
Isn't it brilliant that we don't have to actually worry about that anymore?
I love it.
Um, I'm just curious because I know that I have a lot of consultants who listen to the podcast. Does this model change the type of talent that these firms will be needing or letting go of?
Yeah, I think that that's a really interesting question. I think that the type of talent that we need overall in the workforce is changing, not just in consulting organizations, but across the board. There are emerging skills and capabilities that we absolutely need to focus on. And what I think is really interesting is what we used to think of as the hard skills are becoming less and less important. And what's becoming more and more important are things like communication. I know that sounds crazy because now we're talking about interacting with agents and tools. But when you interact with an agent, you are talking to that agent. And they're built on large language models, which means that, these models are actually, they're very, very nuanced in the way that they understand language. I actually was listening to another podcast a couple days ago that was talking about the way that software engineering is being transformed by AI. And what they found was that many of these engineers were saying, well, my communication skills are getting better because I'm not writing code. I'm actually speaking to an agent. And so, when we direct Galileo, we speak to Galileo in very plain language. We have to be able to explain what we want in a very clear way. So that's one example. That communication skill, what we used to think of as a soft skill, actually becomes more and more important. I also think, though, that it means that there's a little bit more even. We've always in consulting really prioritized that strategic advisory role. That's something that becomes even more important. And I do think in consulting organizations, we need to think about how do we build that talent within our organizations? Because if we're saying that a lot of that entry level work that we traditionally brought in those armies of consultants to do, that's no longer being done by humans, that's being supported by internal agents, then how do we give that exposure and experience to new talent so that we can build the people who will bring that capability to our clients moving forward?
I think one of the elements of this evolution is that I think that we actually have the opportunity to give access to an underserved market. I mean, I would say like typically a company that's been, let's say 10, 20 million may have not been able to afford a McKinsey, a Deloitte type consultancy. So does AI consulting actually change that? Does it and I guess what access do you give to that smaller market that maybe has been underserved, but you have this tool now?
hmm Yeah, that's something that we've found 100% with Galileo, is that it does unlock that kind of middle market that historically hasn't had access to that advice. It's a democratizing tool. It democratizes across organizations that access to information and advice that you're right. Previously, they couldn't afford those types of engagements, but it also democratizes within the organization. So if you think about who our customers were as consulting organizations historically, we were really working at the top of the house. We were able to, to speak to the C-suite, to speak to those folks who were making those strategic decisions. But now with these more self-service AI tools, an organization may say, hey, I'm still going to have people consultants working with my C-suite 100%. I don't want to lose my McKinsey consultant who's been sitting next to me for years or who I know is my trusted advisor, but I'm also going to say maybe that layer below me, maybe the layer below that, they're going to have access to advice through those AI tools that historically they haven't been able to unlock, which means that now we're not just reserving that advice for those critical strategic decisions. We're able to make better decisions throughout the organization. It cascades through.
In when I'm gonna just like let's talk about a use case. So like what is the right use case for, let's say, a 50-person company right now? How they use it today, and how do you see them using it in 3 years from now?
Okay, so a 50-person company, that's relatively small. So we're serving the HR market primarily with Galileo. And so what we find is that historically, those 50-person companies, their HR team really small, maybe one person, maybe two people, and that person is a Jack or Jill of all trades. He or she is doing everything within the organization. They're managing payroll, they're managing hiring, they're managing all of these different pieces, and they are perpetually underwater. So I think there's a couple different ways that AI transforms that. The first is, they will have access to new strategic tools that can help them to automate and accelerate the work that they're doing. So a great use case for a tool like Galileo in that scenario might be help me to build a strategy to leverage AI to rethink my HR workflows. So can I outsource my some of my hiring processes to these great AI talent acquisition agents that exist? How can I make my life easier? And Galileo can absolutely help you build that roadmap that allows you to really multiply your own impact. Now, so that's the immediate use case, right? Put out the fire, make sure that you've got resources. Then the next step might be, well, now that I'm no longer fighting to get payroll out and to make sure that I've got butts in seats and we've satisfied all of our compliance learning, now you can step up to, how am I going to more strategically manage my people function? And that's where I would really bring in a conversation with Galileo. That's one of the things that we love is that, often you can use kind of a more Socratic method. We've built workflows within Galileo where Galileo flips into what we call consultant mode, where just like a really good consultant, it's not going to say, you asked a question, here's your answer, thank you, have a nice day. You ask a question, it's going to say, well, let me ask you some questions. So, in this case, our head of HR for our 50-person organization may say, all right, I now have, I've automated my TA processes. I'm using agents to help me to build and track learning. I now have a little bit of bandwidth. Help me to build maturity within my HR organization. Galileo is going to ask that leader a whole bunch of questions to better understand their current status, the maturity of the organization, change readiness, all of the things that a traditional consultant might ask, and help guide them to where they would have the most highly impactful opportunities to devote their time now that they've hopefully got a little more time available.
Wonderful. Is there anything that a small company of that size should explicitly not use the system for?
I think that one of the challenges here is that there is, with that democratization of access to information and advice, what we've talked about is this idea that there is still that need to put it through the lens of, is this the right approach for my organization? How do I personalize this advice? How do I make that strategic decision? And I think for a small organization, when they're accessing these types of tools, often they're going to see these stories of, what did Fortune 500 companies do? How are they solving these problems? Some of those solutions may not be right for that organization, for the scope of that organization. And so I think that you still need that very strategic lens. We should not be using it to say, well, insert Fortune 500 company here did it this way. So we're a 50-person company, but we want to do it the absolute best way. Let's do what they did. There absolutely has to be that lens of what works and is right for our company, and that human strategic decision to say, I'm doing this because it's aligned with our values, it's aligned with our mission, it's aligned with our current situation and who we are as a company.
Yeah. I just can't emphasize or reemphasize what Amy just said for everyone who's listening, who's using any type of AI tool to make sure that when you're looking at the context, that it does fit with your situation, your company, your values, and where you're trying to take the direction, and not use the big companies as the example. It has to be relevant to what you're doing. So
100%.
thank you for that. Um, so has Galileo ever surfaced an insight that genuinely surprised you and your team?
That happens constantly. So
Okay.
we actually have two versions of Galileo. So we have a customer-facing version of Galileo that has all of our great thought leadership content, our trusted content partners. It's being used by over 1,100 HR company, the HR companies, HR organizations within over 1,100 companies worldwide. But we also have a version of Galileo that is our internal Galileo.
Okay.
And we feed that a lot of our internal content that helps us to, to use it as an internal accelerator and tool to help us do our work better. It also records many of our meetings. So, when clients join meetings with us, we often will say, well, Galileo is here. He will be recording for us, and we can use that for note taking. We can use that for so many different things. So we're constantly finding, particularly within that internal version of Galileo, just really cool new ways to use it. One thing that really surprised me is I went in and I said, Galileo, you've sat in on all of my meetings for the last 6 months. Can you give me some coaching tips? How can I be a better leader? How can I do a better job in meetings? And it gave me some really great nuggets. It said, Amy, you're a little folksy. But I really loved kind of getting that very objective perspective. I had about a 20-minute conversation with Galileo. I got great tips out of it. That was a surprise to me. It was a new way to use it, and I really liked that. We also are getting, though, really cool tips from our users as well. So, a great example, we were talking to a Galileo user at a relatively large company, and they said, well, we were working through some people analytics work, and we were really struggling with how to measure a particular outcome. And so we started talking to Galileo about it, and they flashed up their screen, and Galileo had written these incredibly sophisticated calculations that I'm not sure exactly what they were calculating even. It was really kind of impressive. And they say, yeah, we tested this, we ran our data through it, and these calculations worked. We didn't know that Galileo could do that until the client pointed it out to us. So yeah, surprises for us and surprises from our clients as well.
That's fantastic. Um, have you encountered yet a place where Galileo kind of overstepped its bounds? And when I say that, I just like, is there a situation where only a human consultant should be trusted to ask certain questions?
Yeah. So we have put some pretty firm limits on Galileo.
Okay.
So Galileo is governed by what we call the master prompt. These are the like kind of core instructions that guide Galileo. And within it, we're really, really clear on what Galileo can and cannot do, who Galileo is. And so there's absolutely things that we say you should answer questions like this, and you should not answer questions like this. Beyond that, there's also, so, not beyond that, but within that, I would say there's also some kind of ethical use of AI tools as well, or strategies as well. So, for example, we don't want Galileo making the decision, should you fire someone or keep them on? Should there's some really human decisions that we just don't believe that Galileo should be making. And then there's also, some decisions that we say the access to information that you have, you can give information back, but you're not really these kind of types of questions are outside the boundary of the advice that you should be giving.
Okay, so boundaries you've set, I would imagine, is to the benefit of ensuring that the consultancy also has a place, in going forward. Is-
Um, Well, I don't think that we say, that's not necessarily from a business perspective that we make that decision. So we're not saying, listen, don't answer this question because we want to preserve that for the consultancy. If we believe that Galileo can provide that information in a reliable way, we want Galileo to provide that answer. But what we find is that, often our clients are coming to us. The demand comes from them, not from us pushing or withholding information. It's really about the client saying, we value the human interaction. We need that kind of counsel and advice more than we need the just the agent. So, that's kind of where we don't say don't answer this because of our business model. We say don't answer this because we don't think you can do it well. And in that scenario, we would say, listen, in that you maybe it's that you're able to give that advice, but also, counsel the user to say, you should be talking to an expert. You should be bringing in folks who can have a more robust and detailed conversation about this.
That's fair. So, with that in mind and thinking like future forward, can you walk me through what a consulting engagement looks like as far out as you can say? I'd say like I'm using 5 years from now, but maybe it's as quick as next year from now. Who's in the room? What is Galileo doing? What is the human doing? And what does the invoice say?
Yeah. So, if I think through what these look like, if you think about kind of the steps in a traditional consulting engagement, there's always kind of a discovery phase, right? So, how are we gathering information? And that's really going to be always something that we have to get from the client. So, what the client's doing on their side may look very, very different. In terms of diagnosing, I really view that as being something that's done with the human consultant and the agent in partnership. So we're feeding that knowledge into the agent, and we have a human consultant who's interrogating the information, who's partnering with the agent to help understand what is that core problem, and then building out that the proposed solution, but the timeline is significantly accelerated.
Yeah.
That's really where we're seeing the difference. Is it because we're using that human AI partnership? This is no longer, we have a 4-week discovery period, and then we're going to take the data into a black box, and we may pop up and ask you a question once in a while. It's all of a sudden, this is all happening much, much more quickly. And then, of course, there's always going to be that process of gaining internal buy-in, validating the proposed approach and solution. That's very, very human. I don't know that there's a ton of AI that goes into that at all. And then execution, again, there can be AI components to execution. That's going to be highly dependent on the type of project that it is. Um, but I think that is, that's kind of the next step forward in what this might look like. But I think it could go even further than that. If we think through kind of, what might the next phase of this look like, we're going to continue to see more and more integration more seamlessly of AI tools with the work that we're doing with our clients. So it may be the client, the consultant, and the agent sitting together in the room as, three or more folks working together on that project.
Fantastic. Thank you for answering that in a way that I think our listeners will understand. The I always kick these off with a deliberate conversation and ask what your number one leadership tip is. So, what would be? Let's close it with that today. What would be your number one leadership lesson that you would hand to every person listening right now?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is that leadership is about partnership. It is absolutely not a solo performance. And to be a good leader, you need to view your team as your thought partners. So you're not giving them direction and guidance, but you're engaging them in that process. And a lot of that has to do with shaping the room to fit the team that you have. So when I'm designing projects, I'm constantly thinking about how do I really shape this project around where my team is today and where I need my team to be tomorrow. And as I do that, as Galileo said, I'm a little bit folksy. So I think that transparency and humanity is absolutely key to doing that successfully. And I don't think that you can lose that in the age of AI and agents.
Yeah, I love that. Oh, Amy, thank you so much. This has been genuinely clarifying. I think giving leaders a more honest map of where this is all headed is more than they usually get. So thank you very much for that. For everyone listening, we will link to the Josh Bersin Company and the Galileo products in the show notes below. So this episode has sparked something that you want to share with other leaders in your network who may be wrestling with this right now. Please do so. That's it for today. Thank you so much, Amy. And to my message to my listeners, keep leading deliberately.